just for some introductions, my name is Alicia Mandak, and I am the Senior Academic Counselor in the College of Arts and Sciences. In addition to my main advising duties, I coordinate the peer advising program, which we will talk about in this presentation.
And hello, my name is Joanna Dressel, and I am the Peer Advising Program Assistant in the College of Arts and Sciences. I was also a peer advisor last year when I was finishing my final year at American. I just graduated with a sociology bachelor's.
And good morning, my name is Jimmy Ellis. I'm the Manager of Student Success and Retention. I work in the Office of the Vice Provost of Undergraduate Studies.
So just to give you a goal of what we hope to do for this session is to really highlight what we've learned about the first year experience. There's sort of two goals here. Highlight what we know about the first year experience at AU, but really from what we've learned through our peer advising program, and really about the power of building intentional peer connections, and giving this information in order to illuminate ways that you all can enhance your work with first year students both inside and outside the classroom. So before this presentation, we had emailed out to the folks who had signed up just a question that we wanted you to reflect on a little bit, and we wanted to open up with a little bit of a discussion of what are some challenges that you face in working with first year students. So if anybody would be willing to share, we'd love to hear. Yes, go ahead.
I find that the last couple of years, first year students, because of their educational experience prior to this institution, are lacking a lot of resiliency and adaptability. One fault of their own, and they get practice here. It's really challenging to advise them and support in respects that just stick out.
Yeah.
So that I noticed that.
So a lack of resilience and a lack of adaptability to sort of this new institution and how this new system works. Yep, great, thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
What I find unusual is, let's say they know about this, and then the amount of excuses you get, reasons they can't get to the exam. And I remember, a long time ago, I remember in college, I don't remember ever missing college exams. I mean, I never heard of this. But it's repeatedly, 10% of the class constantly has crises of one sort or another, that they can't be where they're supposed to be.
So a sense of, the expectations being laid out ahead of time, clear, but then students no understanding that the expectation is to meet that.
They think it could be
An exception being given.
dispensation or repercussion for the problem.
Other folks, yeah. Yeah. So,
Graciously said.
yes, yes, yeah. Overestimation of what they can take on. Well, great. Well, thank you all. That helps to kind of give us a little bit of sense of what brought you here. So we will, to start, I want to just give a little bit of information about the peer advising program, because this is where a lot of the information that we're going to be talking about is coming from. So the peer advising program, this is something that I created when I first started here as an advisor in the summer of 2008. And it was originally because of a call for innovative ideas of how to work with a large incoming class. That was a year that there was a significant increase in enrollment, and so the advising office was sort of tasked with, okay, well, what can we do to support these students? And I proposed this idea because of my background. I actually became a peer advisor when I was a student in my undergraduate institution, and it meant a lot to me. And so I was very driven at that time to say, I'm going to do this, and so I just did it. The focus of our program, so you can see the mission that's written up there, but it's really to help bridge that transition between high school and college, and that gap that we tend to see with first year students of, like what you're talking about, sort of this lack of skill sets that they need to really successfully navigate this institution. And so our mission is to facilitate that process to create successful undergraduate students in the College of Arts and Sciences. And a little bit about the program structure. So this is how the program has been structured since fall 2012. We have 4 peer advisors. They're all upperclassmen in the College of Arts and Sciences, and they come from various backgrounds. We also have a program assistant, and this program assistant is a former peer advisor. Joanna is the current program assistant and was a former peer advisor. And their caseloads, they're advised students, and they're about approximately about 100 first-year CAS students that they have on their caseloads. And just a little bit about their activities. So the crux of what peer advisors do is that one-on-one advising. So they reach out to all of their first-year students and invite them to come in for appointments, and really to kind of do that check-in about how things are going. There's sort of twofold things that they do, or twofold tasks that they do in those appointments: to check in on their transition, just kind of have that initial conversation of, tell me how things are going, what is it like living on campus, but then also building in the different tools that we need them to know in terms of how to read your degree audit report, making sure that they understand the general education program, understanding the college writing program requirements, that kind of thing. So those appointments, they have sort of 2 purposes. They also are responsible for developing student-focused programming, so they plan different events for students across campus. They have a blog, and they're really active on social media. And they also provide other various support roles for the CAS Advising Office. For example, we have pre-registration workshops, and our peer advisors assist us with that. The major games, the majors fair that we do in the spring semester, peer advisors are really important in the planning of that. The second point there that I really want to underscore is that really the growth and development of this program has been because of the ideas of peer advisors. In running this program, what has always been very central to it was allowing the ideas of the peers to take the lead. And this is what ensures that this program stays in tune with the first year experience, and really why we have this information now is because I constantly will be asking the peers, what ideas do you have and what do you see students need? And they come up with some really innovative ideas. These are just 3 examples. They did a late night breakfast, they called it Breakfast with Champions, and they used that as a way to talk about the importance of getting involved on campus, and they brought in different student leaders across campus to talk about their involvement. We did a photo blog where we had, in the quad, we had students write on a whiteboard their advice to first-year students, and then they took a picture with it, and we put it on our blog, and that gave us one of our highest viewerships. Even just last semester, one of our peers, she came up with the idea of coffee and confidence, and she just came in one day and said, Alicia, I was thinking what I needed as a first-year student was some tips about confidence, because I was not confident at all. And so they did a little session about confidence-boosting tips over coffee. And so this is really kind of what is why we have the information about first-year students, is because of making sure that their ideas are taking the lead. So to go into now really what our methods were and what we've been learning through all of this, we have sort of 3 things that we will highlight. The first is a feedback survey that we did for the students for this fall 2015. Qualitative approach, which Joanna will take the lead on, and then Jimmy will take the lead on the retention piece as well. So with the feedback survey, so this was every first-year student that met with a peer advisor this fall semester were sent a feedback survey, and we really wanted to get at this sense of what they were learning with peer advising. And so they were sent it after initial meeting, and we had a pretty high response rate of 45%. And this infographic, which hopefully this will work, this is something actually that one of our peer advisors, our current peer advisors, created. And so again, really making sure that the peers are taking the lead, because they can do some really impressive things. I have no idea how she did this, but she did. And so you can see here, in terms of what we were just interested in looking at, is their understanding of their degree requirements, how the advising system works in the College of Arts and Sciences, their awareness of campus resources, and their comfort with choosing a major, and kind of evaluating before and after peer advising. And you can see some nice positive impacts on each of those. And then this last part here, we kind of just wanted to get a sense that, what they thought about their peers, and overwhelmingly the sense of that they really like peer advising and would recommend it to a friend. And a nice little quote here at the bottom that really highlights their experience after talking with the peer advisor. So this was just sort of the start of our investigation into what we're learning about how this is working with first-year students. But let's go back. So Joanna is going to talk about her qualitative approach, and as undergraduate here, her senior thesis was an oral history project that she did in sociology, and so when she moved into the program assistant role, I said, Joanna, would you like to do some oral history work on peer advising? And so this is really pulled from her own research interests and really giving her an opportunity to develop the skill sets that she wants to build professionally as well. So I will let Joanna take over.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Lucia. So as mentioned, we started this project just because we started getting a little bit interested in the impact that the program had on students and who the students were that were going through our program. And so that turned into an IRB approved project that we are presenting now. So we did 6 individual interviews, 4 of which were with current students that are going through the peer advising program, 1 former program assistant, and then 1 former peer advisor. And we also did 1 sort of focus group with the 4 current peer advisors that we have working with us right now. And then the way that we're going to present our findings on this are going to be through going over self-understanding that students have of their first year experience, some of the common challenges that they really seem to be having in that experience, as well as the unique role that these peer relationships have within this whole understanding and the challenges within the experiences. So our first element of the self-understanding issue is this idea of prestige and opportunity. And I came up with this because students are always reporting that they're very excited to come to AU under this idea that it's a very prestigious place to be and that they're very excited to join in this community that has so much opportunity. So everyone cites this internship statistic. There's often a lot of incorrect citing of what the internship statistic is, but they'll mention the bus ads, they'll mention other advertisement models. But really in a way that makes them, that they chose AU for that opportunity, as well as the urban environment, everything that you can do here, and the national and international prestige of being in Washington, D.C. So American University represents a lot of different layers of opportunities that they're excited about. And then I'll share a quote from one of our interviews here. So I'll give you a second to read this. So as the student says, she was looking at local schools, so schools in the area, but along with just the Washington, D.C. component, she mentions that the internship possibilities at American were particularly of interest to her. And then she says, I don't want to say conversations were more intelligent, but the conversations were something that I wanted to be a part of. So this was her walking around on campus when she was visiting the school and saying that she really wanted to join this community of students that she saw here. She also mentions the global appeal, being a Spanish double major. So not only in Spanish, but then also this opportunity of double majoring. A lot of students are like, they want to come to AU because they want a triple major, and they see that as an opportunity here, which harkens back to this, how much students can expect to take on. And they also wanted to be in the city. So then the next element of their self-understanding that feeds into this idea of prestige is a lot of pressure that they put on themselves and a high level of expectation that they all understand that they have when they come into American. And I've categorized this as global and as local pressure. So global meaning that there is a larger idea that their university experience isn't enough for them to be successful after college. So just taking classes and doing well in them does not mean that they're going to be successful after college, that they'll need internships and other opportunities, as well as a local pressure that there are a high number of students getting internships at AU and that they feel competition within their department and within their floors and their friend groups as well. So this next quote that I'm going to share explicates that. So I'll give you a minute to have a look at it. And as she says, pretty much everyone I know has a job right now or is doing something good that will make them look very good on a resume. It's intimidating to think of possibly graduating without internship experience because I'm not really sure how you could even compare to someone who graduated with tons of internship experience or even just one. So there are the 2 elements there. She mentions that everyone she knows is doing something good, and an important piece to know about this student is that she is this was in her 2nd year, and she was telling me about an internship experience that she got at the end of her 1st year. So everyone that she knows as in the fall of her sophomore year had an internship. So whether or not that was an accurate representation, that is the way that she was comparing herself to her peers, was that everyone as a sophomore was already doing things for when they're 25. As well as this idea that when you graduate and you're applying to jobs, whether people came from AU or not, that you're not going to compare if you don't have the same level of perceived experience. And so then I'd like to go into our common challenges that these students had that I noticed. And the first one was a real intimidation and how that translated into their lack of help-seeking behaviors. And so there was a strong theme that students really needed to feel prepared before they talked to a professor or went to like the tutoring center or even came to talk to their academic advisor. That coming in without knowing wasn't where they should be. And that idea of not knowing was a self-failure. And then I'll share this in the quote that I have here. And this was from a student that when she was a high school student, she had experience at a community college taking classes, but she noticed that when she came to AU, she was thinking about college in a whole different light. She said, I guess at the university level, I felt intimidated by the other professors. And so when she had an instinct to go to office hours after struggling on a assignment or something along those lines, she goes, no, I should try to figure this out on my own rather than seeking help. And so that can contribute to a lot of procrastinating with talking to people or asking to help and really psychologically messing with those help-seeking behaviors. And then the next quote is from a student kind of explaining why she feels like her and her peer groups might not visit office hours. She says, I guess one of the reasons people don't go to office hours is because they don't feel prepared. They feel like people with their doctorates don't have time to talk to little old me. And I think that people don't feel, I guess, worthy to talk to their professors, or they don't feel like they have something to offer. And I think this is a really interesting quote because in the middle section there, she also mentions maybe you didn't finish the readings or maybe you didn't do the readings at all, which is a very important thing to think about, that students, for whatever reason, don't always complete all the work, and this intimidation level can be a shut-off for them rather than it's okay that I didn't do it this time, but I can try harder next time. And so then the last element of our common challenges that I want to talk about is this expectation of your social experience. And this comes from a lot of AU students are very high achieving students. I think as was kind of touched on by some of the things that you shared, high achieving in high school. And there's an expectation that being a high achieving student in high school, that college is just going to be the time where you shine. And so there's so much excitement coming to college that then there's kind of a questioning of why they are not immediately happy and satisfied with their college experience the second week of school. And I'd like to share another quote that I think explains that well. She says, and in speaking of how it's more difficult in college to make friends than it was for her in high school, you don't expect the system of college to really affect making friends, but it does. I think we're told a lot that college will be so much better than high school. College is supposed to be the best 4 years of your life, and college will automatically be great just because it is college. So there are all these ideas that are swirling around in their heads of, I'm at college and it'll be great. And I think that it's a very unique position to AU where these students they're highly motivated and they've been told that they'll be successful. And it translates in the next quote into sort of these negative thoughts of self-worth with how the social acclimation is going to be challenging. She says, the idea that college should be great and college is my time kind of fed into that expectation that something is wrong because I'm not having the same friend experience that I had in high school. Because it delivered in the academic set, it seemed like there was a problem with me that it wasn't delivering in the other set. So this idea that it shouldn't, or that the difficulties in making friends and reacclimating to a social life isn't a natural process, but is something kind of self-deficient with the student. And so those are the main themes that I saw as far as students' expectations of themselves, their understanding of the first year experience, as well as their sort of main challenges. And I know that we've already had some time for group discussion, but it would be interesting if any of this resonated with you, or if any of it is confusing, or if there's anything else that you kind of like to share with your own experience working with these students. I see some nods, that's nice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that that mention of the living learning communities is actually a really great transition for this idea of how, in this very unique experience that first year students have, the peer relationships form a really interesting role. So another part of the living learning communities is not only being on the floor with your fellow classmates, but also traditionally having a program assistant. So another peer who's a sophomore who can come in and kind of help you out. And that was a relationship that we were interested in investigating within the peer advising program. And we really did find that there was something unique about that peer role. And the first one, the first theme in that section is this idea of a rehearsal for these intimidating conversations. And so I think what I really noticed is that students were responding that their conversations with their peer advisors made them more comfortable speaking to their academic advisor, to their faculty advisors, and to their professors in office hours. And that there was this element of not only sort of practicing what you were going to say and hearing about other people's experiences, but also about the thought process development of thinking and asking questions. And I think our next quote will highlight that really well. She mentions, "It's really nice to have someone who isn't embarrassing to come to with a stupid question. I felt more comfortable asking questions that I felt were a little bit more surface level. I wouldn't feel comfortable going into my academic counselor with questions that I thought weren't very collegiate, because I'm not comfortable going to an adult with something I don't think that they think is very important." And I think that this quote is really, it illustrates a lot, especially with the idea of perceptions that students have when they're students, specifically of the idea of what validates their questions, what validates their thought process. So even though, as the quote you can see, she says, after the stupid question comment, she says, "Even though there are no stupid questions." So she knows, she has this rational thought process that she's like, okay, I should ask these questions because I need to know these things. But there's also this problem of still having that feeling that there's something wrong with who she is and that she's not where she's supposed to be. And practicing that out and rehearsing that with a peer can really help break down those perceptions and come to touch with the real issue, which is needing to ask questions. And this isn't in the quote, but a little while later, she mentions that in her second appointment with her peer advisor, she didn't feel like she needed to come in with a list of questions that she wanted to ask. She felt like she could come in and talk about what she was going through and independently think through what she needed to know, and ask questions that came from that conversation, which, if you think about it, is a really important growth in the way that students are thinking. So rather than coming in and knowing all the answers, having independent, thoughtful discussions about what they're experiencing. And then our final role here is modeling realistic expectations. So again, cutting through what is perception and what is often myth about college and what you should be experiencing, and meeting students where they're at and showing how varied the student experience really is. And this final quote that I'm going to share is actually from our focus group with our 4 peer advisors that we have currently. And they mentioned, "We always try to bring our personal experience into things. Everyone is different and everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and we try to remind students that this is okay. Meeting with students where they're at, that's what makes us models." So again, just this idea that it's really an intentional relationship that the peers are building, which facilitates students coming to them and looking at them not as peers that they need to compare themselves to, but peers that they can model helpful behavior from. So rather than saying, well, my peer advisor had this internship, it's it's a normal experience for me to have questions and to maybe not make all of my friends my first semester. And that whole growth experience gets a lot more normalized through these interactions. So just to reiterate the sort of 3 points, I guess 6 really, that we went through there. There is the self-understanding idea, which is that students are excited and they look at AU as a promising place to be, but that they also have large expectations of themselves on what they should be accomplishing. Their challenges, which is a level of intimidation with the new system and with their with the people that they view as adults, so whether that's a faculty advisor, a professor, or a counselor, as well as that social acclimation process. And then finally, the unique role that peers can fill in rehearsing and normalizing what are intimidating interactions for them and setting more realistic expectations for their college experience. And with that, I will pass the floor over to Jimmy to talk about some interesting findings.
Great. And so as an on-campus researcher, I'm interested in understanding the effectiveness of programs that we have on our campus. As someone that's interested in ed policy just generally, I go back to the points that across the nation there are persistent socio-demographic gaps in achievement in higher education. And while there's been a lot of strides made in understanding what's effective at the secondary and primary school level, there's actually very little done empirically in a real rigorous way to understand what's effective in college. And so this partnership here was a really unique opportunity for me to identify a program and also a unique data set and some nice variation in how advisor assignments happen to get at some what I am going to make as some causal claims about program effectiveness and if the peer advising does the job that it intends to do. So here we go. The general strategy is going to be, I'm going to give you what you normally see in higher ed research, which is naive OL estimates about program effectiveness. So here we're looking at correlation, trying to take into account student background, and then get a sense of, okay, on average, what kind of effects are we seeing? Then I'm going to identify a situation where we identify a discontinuity in how advisors are assigned to show that the exogenous variation in that assignment leads to ability to make some causal claims. And then get back into some research questions and briefly discuss some results. And so we'll start with just some basic, here's the naive part of the presentation. We can show that just generally in the least specified model to the left to the most specified model to the right, that there's a 5.6 to 7.3% increase on predicted retention for students that participate in peer advising. So again, this is a correlational type thing. We are not accounting for selection at all, so there's a huge selection bias issue question here that selecting to go into peer advising is not endogenous to these results, or is endogenous to these results. The next one is about spring GPA. Spring GPA, I showed that attendance or participants in peer advising, on average, you have GPAs in the spring that are 0.15 or 1.15, 1.17 higher than those that are not participants. And again, not accounting for selection, but still a really nice correlation that says participation in peer advising does have a nice positive impact. So summarize the naive results, about a 7-point bump on predicted retention and about a 0.15 point bump on a GPA. So instead of a 3.5, we'd expect a 3.65 for students in the spring semester. Okay. Next, the natural experiment that I'm going to describe that exploits this discontinuity in how advisors are assigned is if you imagine a student's first letter of the last name as a running variable in which all students are arrayed, where A equals 1, B equals 2, and that's laid out like that. If that's our running a variable, the underlying continuum is how students are allocated by their first letter or last name. The exogenous cut points of how advisors are assigned into treatment or control conditions are determined by the program coordinator. And it's by just strict quartile of the alphabet. And so what we end up with is that advisor-student assignments are made quasi-randomly, as each advisor is assigned to a specific quartile of the distribution of alphabet, sorted by student's last name. And so students can choose whether or not they select to go to advising, but they don't select who their advisor is. And so that alone might not be interesting, but what I try to do is say, what else does that tell us? So conditional on a student's sex and placing the distribution alphabetically, that whether students are assigned to a same-sex advisor is as if random. Okay, so that's really interesting. So I can get the effect of a demographic match or mismatch when it comes to an advisor assignment. And so if you believe this case that assignment itself is as if random, then even more as if random is going to be the assignment to a same-sex or different sex advisor. And so this will allow me to This will allow me to back into some research questions where practically, as a point of practical consideration, we're interested in question 2 the most, right? We want to know what's the effect of peer advising on outcomes. But to get there, we actually work through this same-sex, different-sex demographic mismatch component. And so the first question is, how does revealing the gender of a peer advisor and an emailed invitation to students participate increase their likelihood of taking up the program? And then the second question is the program itself effective on certain academic outcomes? So for question 1, I see that there's a pretty massive impact on male student participation in the program when they're invited to participate in the program by a male peer advisor. And so whereas on average male participation program is below that of female students, when they're invited by a male advisor, we see that participation increases to up over the female participation rate, so about a 40% increase on even how females participate in the program. And then compared to being invited by a female peer advisor, we see that they're 60% more likely to come up and take up the program. And so at AU, that's a really interesting finding. But broadly, when we think about how do you get more men to take up programs generally in primary school, secondary school, and post-secondary, there's something in how you invite students to those things that have a real nice effect on that take-up. And so whether a program is effective or not, I guess the first barrier you want to try to cover and clear is, can I get them to show up? And so this is one way to get students to show up at rates higher than you might expect without this kind of consideration. The second question I look at is through program effectiveness, and here I'm looking at reduced form estimates of being invited by a same-sex or different-sex advisor to outcomes. And so not the outcome of take-up, but the outcome of higher GPA and higher retention into the second year. And here I see strong evidence of significant positive effects on retention and on spring term GPA. And then interestingly, they are similar in magnitude and significance and size to the estimates that I calculate naively just with straight linear probability model with OLS. Now going into the next part of question 2, so the case that I'm making here is that there's no other mechanism by which the gender of a randomly assigned advisor could affect outcomes other than through increased use of peer advising, right? And so that's how we get at the fact is peer advising effective? It is the link between being assigned a same-sex advisor, going more often, and having better academic outcomes. The thing that happened in the middle is peer advising, and exclusively peer advising in my setup. And so that's how we start to really get at, is peer advising effective, controlling for issues of selection into the program. So therefore, the reduced perform results are suggestive of a causal relationship. And the next steps I'm going to use is I'm going to use an instrumental variable approach to look at the same-sex advisor as a dichotomous, binary variable, and instrument that for participation in the advising program to try to control for the endogenous selection of into the program, and to try to eliminate some of that to get unbiased estimates of the true effect. So in summary, I think there's consistent and accumulating evidence that peer advising is effective in improving outcomes. The interesting finding about behavioral nudges, I think, can have just general practitioner relevance to folks across campus. Related is that there's potential male implicit bias against female peer help. And so from a take-up perspective, exploit that to get them to come in. But then from a just being a good person perspective, try to help them to not have that kind of bias so that they can be receptive to help where it comes from. And then for future work, formally estimates these effects using instrumental variables. There's an interesting potential project with racial mismatch. One of the names in each year sounds a bit more non-white than the others, and so there's less research about the non-whiteness sounding of names than it is people being able to pick up gender off of a name, but there's something potentially there. And then also long-run outcomes. So are these effects recursive through the second, third year and towards graduation? And so I'm interested in that as well. Is that it for me? So yeah, so I'll stop there. And any questions at the end to talk about the strategy and all that, I'm happy to field.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah.
So, and just as a note, that the data that Jimmy had was 3 years worth of peer advising program participation data that is tracked all by the program assistant. So, really fortunate to be able to have Jimmy take a look at that data. So, to kind of tie into, so what are we trying to really say here in terms of working with first-year students is really making the case that these intentional peer relationships can be very effective. And we're not though trying to say well maybe you should now just get all male students to be peers.
Right.
There are some important considerations to sort of take into effect if you are somebody that's interested in starting to build or develop students in a sort of a peer capacity. And so in terms of thinking about what kind of student would make an effective peer, the qualities that I list there, that's really what I look for when I'm selecting peer advisors, is having some capacity for reflecting on their own experience, of really thinking about their own growth as a student, because that's the power of peer advising, that when I train these peer advisors, I tell them to talk with these students about what they've learned as students so that they can say that it's okay to fail, or yeah, that happened to me, and to be really intuitive about their own experience. And really being able to admit when they don't know somebody. We really actually don't want the know-it-alls to be in a peer capacity, because their ability to ask questions also then shows their capacity for growth in these roles and openness to the things that we really want them to be working with students on. And empathy is huge in terms of that relatability with students, and they really do need to be self-motivated as well, because this is different than just sort of a student, a sort of random student job on campus. This is a unique kind of role and comes with a lot of responsibility, and so these students really do need to be self-motivated. Another second point there, which I kind of talked about from the beginning, but want to underscore again, is really allowing for the ideas of the peers to take the lead. This gives them a sense of ownership of this role, and that's why they do such quality work, is because they really do, that sense of value in their work and the fact that we value it in the advising office then translate to them doing higher levels of work that really can make an impact. But it's showing them that their ideas matter, and constantly then checking in with them about what their thoughts are, what their ideas are, and what feedback that they have for me about where they want to see this program grow. Because again, that's how we stay in tune with this first year experience. And then really making sure that this is a unique resource. Peers are not meant to be sort of the replacement to a professor or replacement to an advisor. Oh, if your advisor's not available, go see a peer advisor. It's really fitting a whole other space that is a need for students in terms of a kind of resource that can help them effectively transition in their first year and sort of find more success broadly in their experience across campus. I'm glad that the UC was brought up, because we just wanted to highlight a couple other examples of the ways that peers are sort of integrated within AU, because we're not obviously trying to say that you should just go out and create a peer advising program. I'll take care of that part. Bill Davies, who's a faculty member within the School of Public Affairs, he created peer-led reading groups, and the link here is to an article that he wrote about his reading groups that he did. And do you want to describe, because you had a little more familiar with like the structure of what that was?
Yeah, so I mean, the general gist of it is that he taught Introduction to Western Legal Traditions, which is just an intense level of reading that the students weren't ready for, nor did they execute in a satisfactory fashion. And so he created reading groups where a previous student would lead small groups of students and outside of the class groups to work through the material. And then he found just incredible impacts on student engagement, participation, and also products that they would produce as far as essays and presentations and things of that nature.
Yeah, and I think his the last sentence here in this article is great, because it kind of is highlighting what we're talking about. But he said, "It's been my experience that incorporating peer learning environments into class appears to be of great benefit to everyone involved, and and offers gains in yield and efficacy that should be unquestionably considered." So that was one that we wanted to make sure that we highlighted. And then Joanna talked with the folks in the Writing Center and can talk a little bit about that, and also UC.
That's right. I had the privilege of working a little bit with the Writing Center in the beginning of the semester. We always try to blend similar programs, so share knowledge and make sure that we can refer out. So if a student comes to us and we say, "Oh, you should go to the Writing Center," we can talk about it in the most well-known way, and that we can really recommend it as a good resource. The Writing Center, if you're not familiar with it, is it's in the library, and it's run by Jeanette Otten, and she manages this whole team of upperclassmen through graduate students who meet one-on-one with their peers and do writing help. And it's been this really great resource at AU that's sort of been able to assist at the freshman intervention level, where they can't read, they don't understand how to respond to an essay prompt, when they don't know what a thesis is, to graduate level work where you're putting together a presentation or a conference paper, and you need to make sure that you're writing in a way that flows and that everyone can understand it. So it's been able to meet people, again, at where they're at. So if the question is, how do we help students with writing, then tapping into the students that are already leaders and that can be good resources for them has really proven to be a good resource. And the Writing Center actually they've published on this, they've done some research. I think that they actually did a talk at the Ferren conference last year on how to write so that students can understand the prompt that you're giving them. So this is, again, it's an area where these ideas are really coming into play, and people are finding really good examples of how this helps students. And then also I was able to meet with Andrea Brenner and Nicole Davies over at the University College system, and that system is where it's one of those living learning communities. So a student will elect to live on the same floor as members of a general education class, and that they'll have a PA who's usually a sophomore who took the class before, really understands and engages the material, but then also helps them with the holistic development experience of their freshman year. So there are Wednesday labs where it's curriculum enrichment, as well as office hours on the floor that are much more accessible to the student. Like, oh, this is what I struggled with when I went through that class, or yeah, this reading is really hard, maybe we can work through it together. And another note that Andrea Brenner really pushed was that the PAs are trained extensively, so they're given over the summer a wide amount of training on sort of connecting to students emotionally and dealing with crisis situations in a way that faculty members aren't, because they're faculty members and have other things that they are they're experts in. And so there are a lot of instances where students who would have otherwise fallen through the cracks, as they said, can kind of get picked up through these PA relationships. So whether that's a student who's struggling but isn't comfortable vocalizing that to a professor, academically or socially, the PAs provide a really good network and resource for those students.
All right, so just a final underscore. What are they thinking, really? So the kind of hope that we have with the takeaways is that, we really can't really know, only because just when you think you know, it's something else is going to come along, because there's no real singular first-year experience in the sense that this is always going to be what the first-year experience looks like. By the time we're done with this presentation, our information is going to be out of date in the sense that they're going to be experiencing something new. And this first-year experience is dynamic and ever-changing. And so one really effective way that we have found to stay in tune with these first-year students is building intentional peer relationships to understand how to work with first-year students and to help enhance the work that you do with students both inside and outside the classroom. So that's sort of our big underscore, underline, bold, italicized point here. And with that, what is our time?
We're at
Oh,
1:30.
we have enough time for discussion, and so we wanted to then take the end of this presentation to turn it back to you all in terms of what you think this means in terms of your work with first year students, and or any other questions or thoughts that have come up for you in our presentation. Yeah.
Question, Jimmy,
Sure.
this number of advisors, the number of students that what's the ratio, how many students does an advisor ever?
Sure, yeah.
And then a simpler question would be the potential and value of having a peer advising program that was for all sorts of
Yeah. So as far as professional advising allocation goes, or peer advising, peer advising, so about 100 students per peer advisor, and take over the program on average about 54%. And so they saw anywhere between 50 and 60 students during their time as peer advisor in that academic year. And then as far as generalizability across the units, I believe that the relationships and the situations that Joanna is describing, if that's what's happening in those peer advising appointments, that is certainly something of value, where you're not replacing the how-to of registration and advising course sequence, but instead you're preparing students in that first year to be better prepared to engage in those circumstances. I think it's wonderful peer-to-peer training that's happening that'll make them more likely to take up and use those other services more effectively. Is my read right now, given the information that I've come across.
So, one extension of that comment, do you have guidelines for programs who are thinking of developing peer programs?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for almost 8 years now, and I'm pretty anal about saving and recording everything. So I do have it
Very
all.
helpful from a research perspective.
Jimmy was like, "Can you send me this? Yes. Can you send me this? Yes." Like I have it all saved and cataloged. In terms of being able to implement my model into another school. It actually happened in the School of International Service. This last year was the first year that my colleague asked me to basically if she could implement my program in the School of International Service, and they're seeing a lot of similar positive responses. And I think what's really interesting that they did, and what I think is really great, is that also what I did with the program here is that she altered it to adapt to the needs of the School of International Service, because the needs of first-year students in the School of International Service are just a little different in the sense of how they structure their advising with the majors. But I think that's what makes it really powerful is that I think that's really important, that if you are looking to do some kind of peer program, we have the framework and the structure, but then listening to, okay, how is this fitting the needs of whatever it is that I'm looking to help students with? Because when I first created this program, it was a mishmash of my peer advising experience. I was an orientation leader. I worked at the mentorship program at the University of Michigan, and I literally just stole things, because I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. I believe that you can patch things together. And then over the years, I started to see what needed to sort of be altered and changed to adjust to the College of Arts and Sciences.
And as we flesh out a formal paper that we want to think about putting together for this, as an appendix, we want to do a compendium where we say, in order to replicate this on your campus, I'm going to leverage everything that we're learning from her to try to put it out there, to build a body of evidence that's in line with what we're finding, to say that peer advising works in a lot of different settings.
I think I want to get tips or guidelines on how to solve first
Yeah, well, Joanna, you were what was the
A program
role?
associate.
Associate. Yes. Do you want to talk about what that looked like in the
Yeah.
classroom?
Well, I think again, as Lizzie mentioned, it's really always going to be about the needs of the students, right? So I think like I've been able to have sort of the peer roles. I did the general education faculty assistant, and then I did a living learning community, and those are both very different classes with very different needs. And I think that in Bill Davies' examples, it was something that he's been doing this for a number of years, and so he was able to sort of tweak it as such. But I think it just goes back to that idea of identifying what students' needs are, and then finding ways to connect students that are able to fill that. So identifying strong students in your classes, not only students who are high achievers, but students who connect to you and are engaged and listening and are empathetic learners, and then sort of seeking out ways that they can build something like a reading group or laboratory help. I mean, it'll depend, of course, on the subject. I think also from my own experience as a student worker, I'd say that I shouldn't say like totally the most important thing, but a very important thing is support and recognition. And it can be really hard to do. I mean, there's a professional component to this in the sense of like knowing the information to contribute, but then there's also a very emotional labor component to it, and it can be difficult to have that kind of emotional relationship with students and not feel like there is a support behind you, right? Because there are very reflective conversations that you have with students, and so making sure that I was in this role, I had a very supportive program coordinator, which is really helpful to come back to and say like, wow, I just had this really difficult conversation with someone, as well as the peer advisors are paid. And obviously it's not always possible to have compensation, but the general education faculty assistance program, unless that is no longer an option, I think is a really great way to give students the support that they need to dedicate time outside of the classroom in order to meet with these students outside of that. And in other ways, I mean, maybe that is just, I know with the professors I've worked with, that is where I'll be getting my letters of recommendation from, and that is a huge, like those relationships and that incentive is huge as well. So I think building those connections are really important, and then supporting in some way.
And a quick add-on, I think just from talking with Bill Davies and others that have done similar things, it's a clear identification of a problem that you are having in the classroom, and then peers being the strategy. I think whenever the peer advising is the goal, that can be, it's hard to kind of make that happen. But if you have a problem and you think peers can be the solution, then I've seen success and be able to formulate things like that. And then I think this is an obvious one, but previous affiliation seems to matter a lot. And so previous affiliation with the class or the experience, that's sort of an alumni aspect to the program is really important too.
Yeah, and just, as my brain is sort of working out, okay, well, what are some ideas? The first thing that I always go to is, well, let's ask the students to say, like, what it is that they would need, and identify, maybe do you have some students that kept going to office hours, and just taking a second to kind of do a little brain dump with them, because the kinds of things that these peers come to me like with their ideas, it blows me away, and to just kind of see what's going on in there can really then help to figure out how then you can utilize them in a peer capacity. Yes.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that is a really important point. That there, I mean, you'll have, so in these interviews even, so if we're looking at that data, people will mention that, oh, I have friends that go to office hours because, or don't go to office hours, excuse me, because they work and the office hours are always in times when they can't come. And so that is certainly a consideration if you're thinking about ways to make office hours more accessible to students, like Skype options or things along those lines. And yeah, and if intimidation is a problem, I think that idea of the location and the environment is something to really think about. I spoke on a panel once with a professor, and we got into a little argument about power dynamics in office hours, and because I do think that as a peer advisor, there's always there can be a burden on the person that you want to bring them in to make sure that you are accessible and that you try to level the power dynamic as much as you can. Of course, if you're an expert and and there are just going to be things that are there, and you want to have a culture of respect, but that doesn't mean that things have to feel adversarial, and so there are ways that you can kind of think about that environment as well. But certainly, I mean, there's always that question of if a student just doesn't want to go to office hours, they're not going to go, and there is also this element of thinking about the social pressure of college and where students are prioritizing their time. And if, they're like, I really want to, rush this Greek organization, which I only mention because that's a large amount of time, other things might be deprioritized. And so in those situations, I think that there is, to make it a priority of student, I think that's something that peers can really do in the sense of hey, I did this and it was really important. But ultimately, it's always going to be a student's decision. But I think that there are ways that, from our staff offices, from faculty offices, that we can kind of make it more accessible and amenable to what students are how they're feeling. Please.
And real quick, just as someone that was invited into their world, the sense that you get before you even have a conversation with them that peer advising is going to be friendly, helpful, and supportive is there. So the culture has been set up where I was expecting to be taken care of and supported as I went through this research project as someone being invited in. And the very ecology of how they set up their meeting space. I mean, you walk in, you kind of lounge in, you're like, okay, this is nice. And then it's side by side.
Yeah.
That there's no table in their office where you're face to face. It's more like kind of a side by side thing. The lighting is good. But there's there's things up on the walls. It just feels like a place where I can lose some of that feeling that I might have had walking through the door.
All intentional.
Yeah.
It worked.
Stars on the wall.
Yeah.
I was affected.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a little bit more time.
5 minutes, in fact.
Yes.
Well, we very much appreciate it and hope that you have found this engaging. And this is our contact information in case you need to contact any of us. And we will certainly hang out around here for any other questions. But we really appreciate it. This is stuff that we all feel very passionate about. It's a labor of love for me. So it's really nice to kind of see all on the interest. So thanks so much.
Oh, sure.
Fill out your evaluation form.
Yes,
Please,
fill out.
thank
Yes.
you.
Thank
Before
you.
leaving.
Yes, hi.